welcome very heartily to all of you joining us today for this exploration of the Wolf Convection Steam Oven. We're going to do as close to a deep dive as we possibly can in a short amount of time. So we'll be addressing just the hows and whys and what makes a convection steam oven such a remarkable tool. My name is Chef Ben Davis. I am the executive chef here at the Roth Living Showroom in Denver, Colorado. We're enjoying a lovely afternoon here in November, and we're very excited to be joined by all of you to talk about what is arguably my absolute favorite appliance that we manufacture and that we sell here at Sub-Zero and Wolf. So we're definitely going to cover just kind of the basics of everything, and then your questions that you're typing into the chat feature, we are going to address those at the end of the session. We have a lot of people joining us today, so we want to make sure that we answer all of your questions as very best can. So we're recording them all now, and then we will collate the ones that are the same. So we make sure we answer all of those first and then get to your specific questions about the use and care of the item, as well as some of the features that it entails. We'll also be posting a recording of this session on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and view it in the future, if for some reason you need to drop off today for whatever reason, maybe you have to make dinner wherever you are, or you've got some other pressing things you need to do, then just know that you can go to our YouTube channel at Roth Living and check out the video, because it'll be posted in about 24 hours or so. So just be aware of that. So again, keep typing your questions in, please. Don't be shy, ask all those questions. We'll definitely get them addressed. So we're going to talk about what a remarkable appliance this is. And I always like to start out by what's the history behind this technology? Where did it come from? And how did we get to this point that we have this amazing steam technology in our kitchen? And why? Why would we need a steam oven in our kitchen? And what are those benefits going to be? You know, this is a technology that's been around for quite some time, but for the vast majority of its life, it's been in restaurants and big hotels, convention centers, things like that. Also, even on cruise ships, aircraft carriers, anywhere you're preparing lots of food for lots of people and you want to serve it all at the same time, but you need to hold it in a way that it'll stay nice and moist and tender and juicy, and then you're able to serve it at a really nice serving temperature. That's where this technology came from years and years of banquet facilities needing to do things like that. So that's where the technology came from. And it's really a marriage of steam and convection heat. The original ovens were called combination steam ovens because they combined those two heat sources. And you always kind of think to yourself, well, why? What is it about steam that's going to make such a difference when I'm cooking? Well, there's a great example of that as we think about how steam cooks and how water vapor cooks for us. Just think about this as an example, right? Right here, we have a kettle of boiling water, right? And we know that the temperature of that steam is what, maybe, well, I don't know, 210, 212 degrees. So we know that that's the temperature of boiling water. If we have an oven and we're cooking in our oven and we're baking some cookies, or we're baking some biscuits, or we're roasting a chicken, that oven could be 375, 400 degrees. Well, if I open this oven and I reach into it to remove that item from the oven, even if the oven is 400 degrees, I'm not burnt at all. I'm safe. I have no trouble working in that environment. However, if I come over here and I have this plume of steam coming up here, I'm never going to stick my hand into that stream of steam because I'm going to burn myself really, really badly. And we've already stated that that's only 210 degrees. That does some serious damage to my exposed skin, whereas the 400-degree oven doesn't. What that teaches us is that water vapor, steam, is so much more efficient at moving heat from the cooking apparatus to the food. And if it's more efficient, now you're cooking faster, right? So now when you're cooking faster, you're in the hot oven for a shorter amount of time. Plus, you're using moisture as a way to cook something. So you're already adding moisture to that cooking process. So what we end up with is faster cooking times, a greater amount of moisture that we're cooking with, and the resultant is a better product, right? So this is why we want to harness the power of steam when we're cooking in the oven. And because the oven is a combination mode and we can use those two forces together of steam and dry convection air, we can do a lot of really amazing things in the oven. Anything from roasting meats and poultry and seafood to vegetable cookery to all manner of baking, whether it's breads, pastries, puff pastry, you name it, all of those things can be prepared in the convection steam oven. So when we look at it, when we think about how it's going to enhance our lives, it really is pretty self-evident that being able to cook with steam while using convection can really give you a lot of opportunities in your oven. You know, between the convection steam oven, right? The convection steam oven can be the replacement, if you will, for everything that this larger M series oven can do, short of one thing, which is broiling, right? We don't have a broiler in our convection steam oven. And it can also replace your microwave in the fact that it can do everything except reheat your coffee and pop your popcorn. So now there's only 3 things that we can think of that a convection steam oven can't do that 2 appliances together can. So, and if you think about it, the convection steam oven can obviously steam where neither one of these other 2 items can. So it really is a remarkable piece of equipment, right? So some of the basics about the convection steam oven that I think is important to note as you're looking at RCSO versus maybe some other convection steam ovens that are out on the market. Our convection steam oven is not a plumbed item. You don't need to run a specific water line into this unit. You also don't need to put a drain line into it. So it saves you the hassle of having to plan for a particular water line or a drain line. I think that's a real advantage because then you can put it where you find it most useful to you and how it best fits your lifestyle. We also like to make sure that you know that it's a good idea to mount them at a fairly high level so that you are not standing above the oven when the steam is released from the cavity. So you're not getting a big face full of steam. Not going to be dangerous in any way, but it could be just a little unpleasant. And I will tell you from experience that it's nice to have it mounted at about, chin height, because it's much easier to clean and maintain when it's mounted thusly. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about putting a convection steam oven in your kitchen. This is a great mounting height for it to keep it above either an M series or an E series oven, or you could even mount it over, say, a coffee maker or a microwave if you wanted it a little bit lower, right? So lots of different ways that you can operate this device, right? We've said it's not plumbed, so it makes its own steam. And of course, the question for many people is, where does the water come from? If you've not got a plumbed appliance, where does the water being produced by? Well, in some of the others, you'll notice that some other convection steam ovens, when you open the door, the reservoir is on the interior of the oven, which frankly to me makes no sense, because then if you do run out of water, you have to open the door, let out all your heat and your steam, right, while you're cooking in order to replace the water in the oven. The nice thing about ours is our water reservoir is located here above in the corner. So all we need to do is fill this reservoir with water from the kitchen tap. You don't need to do anything special. You don't have to have a special filtered water or anything like that. You can just fill it straight from the tap. In fact, we almost insist that you fill it straight from the tap because that gives the oven the chance to operate at its maximum capacity. So now as you've got water in here, now we can steam, and it's obviously a steamer just by itself. So for those of you who might have at one time had that funny looking flying saucer thing that went into a pot of water, and you put your broccoli on top of that and you boiled the water below it, and all that nice steam came up through that little device and you steamed your broccoli. Well, this is a little more sophisticated than that, because in this case, I can set the temperature of my steam to anywhere between 90 and 100 and 210 degrees. And why in the world would anybody want to set steam temperatures lower than 200 degrees? Well, if you think about it, what better way is there than to defrost some frozen products than by using a very gentle steam, right? Using 110 degree steam is an ideal way to defrost your frozen meats and seafoods so that they don't dry out and get that weird sort of rubbery, partially cooked texture that microwave defrosting does to your food. So this is a great way when you have this really wide range of steam temperatures that you can actually use the steamer to, or the steamer function in order to defrost foods in a very safe and efficient manner. So we're just going to program this. We're going to do a little quick steaming of some shrimp so you can see how quickly we'll do that. We're just going to set this now to 8 minutes so we can do a quick steam on some fresh shrimp. And you can see that in the amount of time that it will take for the steamer, for the convection steam oven to completely prepare the shrimp, would have been about the same amount of time it would have taken a pot of water to come to a boil. So in that time, we can get the whole thing done and get it done, in my opinion, a little bit better than we would if we were cooking them on the stove. So it gives you that wonderful flexibility and saves you time in the fact that also it almost never requires preheating, right? So that in and of itself will save you an enormous amount of time in the kitchen, because in most cases, about 85% of the time, you don't need to preheat the oven in order to pull off whatever it is you're doing inside it, whether you're roasting a chicken or cooking some shrimp, baking a loaf of bread. All of those things can be done without preheating the oven, because obviously when steam is injected into the oven cavity, we're cooking immediately upon the addition of steam to the oven cavity. So as it's heating up, we're already cooking using that steam function, right? Now, steam is just one of the main functions on this appliance. We have 5 what we like to call quick start functions, steam being the first, the second being just straight convection, so just dry air. Then you have your 2 essentially combination modes, the ones that you're going to use most often when cooking food. That's going to be a convection steam mode, where you're getting the benefit of both obviously hot, dry air and the addition of steam throughout the cooking process. So you'll know that the entire time that whatever it is you're preparing is in the oven, there will be steam present during that process. And this is perhaps the cooking mode with the broadest number of uses. Everything from, you know, replicating a water bath environment for cooking things like cheesecake, flan, custards, anything that would be requiring a water bath in a traditional oven. You can use the convection steam in a lower temperature to achieve those same results. In that central section, you have just a general roasting, just good for cooking vegetables. If you want to get nice, tender, moist roasted vegetables, or you're just doing a very straightforward process on roasting chickens or things like that, you can use those middle temperatures. And then when you want to get something crispy and brown and caramelized, where the flavor comes from, is like if you look at this whole chicken that's cooked over here, a higher temperature setting in the convection steam setting will give you those results. Now, it always sounds counterintuitive, right, to say, oh, I want to make something brown and crispy, let me use steam, right? Because water, right, we never use water to make the outside of something be really beautiful and brown and caramelized and have all that flavor that we associate with that effect, with that Maillard effect of browning and giving us flavor. So, but convection steam, right? Remember that even though we've got steam present, we're also able to drive the oven up to 440 degrees Fahrenheit. So when we have that temperature at those higher ranges, we're always going to get browning. But the great part is the steam has kept things moist. It's cooked it much faster, so that you end up with a product that's not dried out, but yet still is brown and crispy, using an environment that's saturated with steam. So it doesn't make any sense to most people, but when you want those results, that's when you start using convection steam to get those results, right? And then the last mode in there, that's like sort of one of the quick start modes, is what we call convection humid. Convection humid is an interesting name for a mode. It's hard to figure out, sort of discern, what does this really mean? But what convection humid does is there's another function of this oven that is different from other ovens, in the fact that we can seal it so it's not venting. So items that are already very moist when you place them into the oven, casseroles, any baked good made with a batter, so a banana bread, quick breads, anything like that. When you want to get a nice bake on it without running the risk of drying something out, convection humid, right? The oven doesn't produce any steam, but it doesn't allow any moisture to leave the oven cavity during the baking process. So any of those items that you might normally worry about drying out if you overbaked it or left it in the oven just a little bit too long, convection humid is going to help you, because it's not going to allow that moisture to escape. So it's really a great mode to use. I use it a lot for baking cookies believe it or not, when you like your cookies to be a little bit softer in the middle, but maybe still a little crispy around the edge, convection humid is a wonderful mode to use for doing that type of baking. Right? So those are sort of the primary sort of modes that you use when you're the driver. You're making the decisions about, am I going to use steam? Am I not? How hot am I going to make the oven? How long am I going to leave it in there? It's sort of a manual transmission. You're going to decide how you want the oven to perform, right? Those modes are there at your disposal. But the other great thing about the CSO is it has what we call the gourmet mode. So the gourmet mode is, instead of giving you ways of operating the oven, it gives you choices of what you want to cook. So if you're just steaming vegetables, if you're roasting a prime rib, if you're going to bake a loaf of bread, maybe a tray of muffins, any of those things, they're programmed in to the oven so that you can touch gourmet, select what it is you want to prepare. And in some cases, it's going to give you more than one way to prepare it. And as you learn about how the oven functions in the different modes, you can say, oh, for this recipe, I really think I need the steam to be present the entire cycle of the cooking. But in other items, you might say, you know what? I'd rather have the oven decide to add just a little bit of steam at the beginning and then finish cooking it the way it would see fit. So the oven will make those decisions for you. It'll help you kind of guide you through it in that gourmet mode. And it's everything from just steaming green vegetables or cauliflower, carrots, all of those things. Something as simple as that, right? Giving you time, temperature, and mode for cooking it, to as complicated as, I want to roast a standing rib roast for a holiday party, and I want to make sure that it's done at exactly this moment in time. So if I know that I want it to be medium rare and would like to serve it at exactly 7:30 p.m., I come into my gourmet settings, I choose that slow roast function, and I can choose prime rib and then roast my prime rib to the exact internal temperature that I would like and tell it to be done exactly when I would like it to be served. And the oven will go so far as to rest it for you, so that when you're ready to serve, you just need to remove the roast from the oven, take it to your cutting board or your presentation platter, and then slice it. There's no resting needed once it's left the oven. It's already been rested fully, so you don't have to worry about it leaving a giant puddle all over your cutting board or on your platter. So you can get as sophisticated as that when we talk about those gourmet features, right? Because all of it's built in to the oven so that you can just select it if you're a little unsure how you're going to cook something in the convection steam oven. Now, there's a question that we get all the time from the people who are coming when we used to have lots of these live events here in the showroom. But one of the big questions was, how do I adapt my recipes? Do I need to adapt my recipes for using the convection steam oven? Is this something that I'm going to have to completely rethink everything I've ever done? Fortunately, the answer to that question is no, you're not. But once you have that basic understanding of what the oven is doing in the various modes, you can then apply that to the convection steam oven. But one thing that you can always know, it's about to be done. We're about to have our shrimp just finished. So here's a nice gentle chime. It's not the loudest chime in the world, but it's there. So it'll tell you when it's ready to go. So you can see it when we open the door, and there was steam obviously produced, you're going to get a big whoosh of steam coming out. But don't worry about that, because it's not going to damage your nice cabinets above it or anything like that. You can't do any damage to it. So don't worry about that. So where you place it, you don't have to make any special accommodation above it. That little bit of steam comes out. And so we can see how beautifully these have cooked. So all we're going to do now is take our freshly steamed shrimp. We're going to pile them onto some freshly crushed ice. Now we're going to just squeeze some fresh lemon juice right on top while they're still hot. And then always a little bit of white wine just on top. And just, guys, always remember the rule for cooking with wine. If you're willing to serve that bottle of wine to someone that you like, then you can cook with it, because then you're willing to drink it. And what good is a wine if you're not willing to drink it? So we're just going to toss these in just for a second to get them nice and cool. you don't want to leave them in the ice for any more than 5 minutes once they're done. But you can see how quickly and how beautifully. Now, what's the difference between a shrimp that's cooked in the steamer and a shrimp that's cooked in a pot of simmering water? Well, one of the beautiful things is that because we can set our steam to a slightly lower temperature than the boiling point of water, right? We can set it to whatever we desire. As we use lower temperatures as a steamer, we get a more tender, less sort of rubberized and tightened product on our seafood. So it's always a good idea when you're steaming seafood is just to put a little bit lower temperature when you're cooking it. So anywhere between 175 and 200 degrees gives you really nicely steamed and tender shrimp when you want to cook them like that. So you can see how quickly that comes together and makes a really quick way to do an hors d'oeuvre, you know, a quick little appetizer, should you notice. I mean, what you probably noticed too is that I put a tray, a solid tray underneath my steaming tray so I could catch any excess water that might drip away from my shrimp, and now makes my cleanup on the oven much easier. There's always going to be a little residual water in the bottom of the oven, but that's easily wiped away. And so now the oven is good to go. Remember too, one of the great things about this appliance is that because you're using steam frequently, it's essentially self-cleaning itself all the time. The steam is washing down the sides of the oven, washing the floor, so you can easily just wipe it out. You don't need to go all the hassle of doing deep cleanings with heavy chemicals and things like that. You don't need to run extensive cleaning cycles in order to wash the walls. Literally 20 minutes of pure steam is a great way to just loosen everything on the walls, and then all you need to do is wipe it out. So it really is a very easy item to maintain. I mean, that's the other thing I love about it. I never have to worry about having to pull the racks out and scrub all the tines really closely. All the interior pieces can go through the dishwasher, so it can be washed that way as well. So it makes it very easy to clean. So it also gives you lots of chances to save your own recipes. It has the ability to program in the oven, so in the unit, so that you can discover a particular way you like to prepare a certain dish. You've really honed in on it, and now you just save that as one of your favorite recipes, and then you can always go back to it and prepare it over and over again using what may become the ideal way for you to prepare that recipe. So very flexible. Just remember too, it can do things that other ovens can't do. Any of you out there who like to do preserves, canning, anything like that, convection steam oven can replicate the giant water bath. So instead of putting a giant pot of water over 3 burners or 4 burners on your stove and taking the tongs and your hands into, taking your hands, life into your own hands when you're dunking those jars into the boiling water, here in the convection steam oven, I just line up my jars on one of the trays, put them in, I touch the sanitize button, and then preserve the jam jars, and it preserves and sterilizes the jars for me. And I've just off you go. You can just get that done. So that's one other thing that you can do in here. It has the ability to make your own yogurt. So you can do slow, moist fermentation processes if you want to make your own yogurt in here, and not having to go out and buy a separate yogurt maker. It can function as a warming oven as well. There is a warm feature on this oven as well that you can access. So should you not need it for any more preparations, but you want to hold something for a party or some large event that you're throwing, you can use it as a warming oven as well. One of the advantages of using this appliance as a warming oven over your other warming devices is that obviously steam is employed there to keep that item warm. And then I have to mention this because really, for some people, this is the reason that they own a convection steam oven. It is the single best reheating tool that there is. Bar none, there is nothing that you can reheat your leftovers in, right, that is going to outperform the convection steam oven. And how? Obviously, we're using steam, right? So we have just a basic reheating function where you're placing something in the oven. It's a plate of leftover food from the night before. Maybe it's some takeout food. Maybe it's just a bowl of mashed potatoes that you had to make a day before and you want to heat it up again. You can place that in the convection steam oven and heat that up. It's always going to use a combination of steam and dry air to reheat that item. In fact, you know, you can take a loaf of bread that might be 3 days old. It sat in your bread box or maybe on your counter or in a bag on the shelf, and you want to refresh it. You want to reheat it. The reheating function has a setting for bread as well. So it'll bring it back to the point where it's almost just like you baked it, just like you brought it out of the oven and finished baking it. My acid test for that was always day-old rice, because to me, that's nothing worse in the world to eat than microwaved day-old rice. It just gets dry and chalky and literally it's inedible. And so most people, you know, when they have leftover takeout rice, they don't even save it because they don't think there's any way they can reheat it and make it palatable unless they put it in soup, I suppose. So convection steam oven, however, put that rice in there in a bowl, put it into the reheat function using the moist setting, and it will fluff that rice right back up, make it soft, tender, just like you steamed it in the convection steam oven. So there's no waste in that respect. You can save those items and be looking forward to eating your leftovers as opposed to saying, oh, I'm going to put it in the microwave. It's going to dry it out. It's going to be terrible, but hey, I don't want to throw it away, so I'm going to eat it, right? Again, reheating your pizza, same thing. Now, inside tip, if you're going to reheat pizza, don't use the reheat setting. Use convection steam, set the oven at 365 degrees, let the oven preheat to 365 in the convection steam oven. Then just throw your pizza right in on the rack. So just take this wire rack that comes with your oven, place it in there, put your pizza right on it, 365. It'll take anywhere between 4 and 6 minutes, depending on how large the diameter of the pizza is that you put in there. But if you want to reheat old pizza, that's the way to do it. Again, convection steam, 365, 4 to 6 minutes. But preheat the oven because that'll make it even better. And it'll be like you just baked that pizza. None of that weird translucent cheese and crusts you can't chew, all of those things. That's when you want to use the convection steam oven as a reheating tool. So really remarkable in that respect for reheating. So we want to get to your questions for sure, because I'm sure there are lots of them. So we wanted to make sure that we save some time here at the end. But just so you can see here on my left would be your right as you're looking at your screens. All of the items that you see here on the counter were prepared completely in the convection steam oven. So we roasted these butternut squash and Brussels sprouts with a little bit of bacon using the convection steam oven. We did this chicken, whole chicken. It's about a 5 to 5.5 pound whole chicken, roasted in about 47, 48 minutes from cold oven all the way to being completely done. The loaf of bread was baked completely in the convection steam oven using one of the many ways to bake bread in the oven. And then the last thing we prepared is this pumpkin loaf right here, just a fresh pumpkin loaf prepared using that gourmet setting where you literally prepare the batter, set the loaf into the oven and just choose the quick bread setting, and the oven takes it from there. You don't have to worry about temperature. You don't have to worry about what mode it's using. It'll actually just tell you the time that it thinks it'll be done. So it's truly remarkable in that respect. And then, so you can see obviously everything there was prepared in the convection steam oven. So you can see that it does really have a wide range of things you can do. And this isn't just even scratching the surface. So when you want to start the questions, or we can start answering those questions. So we can try to address them all with everybody.
Yep, we'll get them loaded.
Okay.
And we will kind of start here just in a couple
okay,
minutes
great.
so we get them going.
Great. So, one of the other things that's really remarkable at the CSO that, that it's really a fun toy. I had a gentleman in the showroom a few months ago before the whole pandemic hit, and we were still seeing a lot of people in the showroom. And he walked up and he said to me, he said, just tell me if it'll do one thing. He said, all I want to know is will it prepare chicken nuggets? How well is it going to cook chicken nuggets? And I said, you know what? Not only is it going to prepare it really, really well and make the outsides wonderful and crispy and brown, but the insides will be moist and juicy and all those things. But there's an actual button in here. It doesn't say chicken nuggets. It just says frozen appetizers, right? So you can even train your kids, right? If you have things that they like to snack on, right? And you take away their microwave, but you want to still give them a chance to cook something, you give them that frozen appetizer button. The beautiful thing about it is they can literally just spread those frozen treats out onto one of the trays, pop it into the cold oven, frozen appetizers. All they need to read on the package from those appetizers is how long did it say you needed to bake them? Disregard the temperature, disregard whatever way they say, whether it's bake or anything like that, just the time. Once they can read the time on that package, they can just hit the corresponding button to the time on the package, and voila, the oven takes it from there, because there is a very sensitive sensor. That sounds redundant, but there's a sensitive sensor in here that literally, when you've programmed it to say chicken nuggets, and the time is 22 minutes, you pop that in there, that sensor then takes the temperature of the oven, raises the temperature to a certain point. From doing the raising of that temperature, it can calculate the mass of the food that's in the oven, and then give the time for cooking and the temperature for cooking. So you always get a product that is resultant as perfect out of the oven. So just a really fun thing you can do with the oven, not only with frozen appetizers, but frozen potatoes, frozen pizza, all sorts of different things. The oven will take care of those things for you as you use that sensor as a reheating tool. So it really does work. I've never had a lot of luck with a lot of the other sensors in ovens, but this one works remarkably well, and it is really, really fun. So, all right, so we got some questions we need to answer.
Yeah.
We do. All right.
First one, let's start with a fun one.
Let's start with a fun question. All right, I'll try to repeat the question, or if you can hear Lynn, hopefully you can hear Lynn.
Can you reheat French fries and make them edible?
You can. So again, it's going to be that reheat method. So my favorite button on the oven is here. It's the more button right here, right below the quick start button, the more button. And in the more button, as you scroll over on the more button, one of the items you're going to see is auto reheat. And auto reheat is a process that's using that sensor, right? You're just going to tell the oven that you're going to reheat something, and you either want it to be moist, nice and soft and succulent and moist, or you want it to be crispy. So if I'm reheating French fries, I'm spreading my French fries on a tray, I'm placing them in the oven, I'm choosing that auto reheat function, and then selecting the crispy designation. And then all I do is touch enter. The oven now knows you're reheating an item and you want it to be crispy. It will dose the right amount of steam, plus raise the temperature to the proper amount, and give you crispy results. This is also great for old egg rolls that you want to reheat. Maybe you've got a slice of apple pie and you want the outside of your crust to be nice and crispy, or maybe it's a chicken pot pie or something of that with a nice pastry crust around it. You use the crispy setting on your auto reheat function under the more button, and you're going to get really great results at the end using that without having to do pretty much any thinking other than this is how I'd like it to be in the end. So that's the best way to reheat French fries in the oven. All right, next.
So from Barbara and several other people, how do I find the warming setting? Found it once, but can't remember how to get there.
So the warming, how do we find the warm setting on our convection steam oven? So we want to go to warm. It's under the more button, right? So you touch more and you want to scroll over. And right at the end, you'll see a little, it looks like what we know in French cuisine is a cloche, which is that dome that they used to put on dishes in fancy restaurants which hold the heat in. But right there at the end, that's the keep warm setting at the very end of the more button, right? So if you touch more, go all the way to the end, then you can touch it. It's always going to tell you that if you want to hold something warm in the oven, it's either rack position 2 or 1 and 3. The oven is very forthcoming about where it thinks the very best place to keep something warm is, or to cook something in as a single tray, or it gives you the options for multiple racks, right? So in this case, we can do up to 2 racks of keep warm, and then it's going to tell you what temperature it's going to want to hold it at. And then you can change the time for how long you're going to keep something warm. It won't allow you to hold anything in a warm setting for greater than 90 minutes. So if you have something that you need to keep warm for a few hours, you may either have to use an M or E series oven. well, it would be an M series oven if you have an M series with the warm setting, or if you have a warming drawer, you can use that for a lengthy warm hold. So, okay.
Don was asking, what is the difference between the reheat mode under the quick start menu and the auto reheat mode under the more menu?
Okay, so in the plain reheat, in just straight reheat in your quick start menu, right? That's going to be, you're going to decide how long you want it to let something reheat, right? And you could adjust the temperature. I do not recommend that you reheat items at temperatures greater than 250, A, because you don't ever want to put something that hot in your mouth, and B, you don't want to dry anything out. So in using just the straight reheat mode, right, you are going to get a certain amount of steam, but you'll never get temperatures in excess of 250, generally speaking. When you're using the auto reheat function, again, there's those two choices, crispy and moist. So depending on what outcome you would like for your reheated item, you want to select either one of those. Moist is going to be the most common choice when you're using the auto reheat function, because it's going to refresh items. So if you have a plate of leftovers, maybe it's some sliced pot roast and maybe some potatoes, maybe some vegetables, and you'd like to reheat the entirety at once, you can assemble that on a plate, place it into that auto reheat mode and use the moist setting, because it'll make everything a little bit moist. Now, if you notice the first time you do that you have a little bit of water that's collected on your plate, right? After you've reheated it, what I recommend that you do in order to avoid the water on your plate, not that it's not going to be soupy or anything like that, but there could be a little water from the steam that was used to reheating. Place your solid tray, your solid sheet for your convection steam oven in rack position number 4 in the very top. That'll help reduce the amount of water that will condense on your plate. But again, it's not a lot of water, but that's going to be the biggest difference, is that in that auto reheat function, you're just telling the oven, this is how I would like it to turn out. The oven will do the rest. It'll set the temperature, it'll set the time, and it'll add the proper amount of steam to achieve that end.
Someone was asking just really quickly, as you're talking about the convection steam mode versus the steam mode, those are the two different modes. Even though we're calling it a convection steam oven, there is a difference between the steam mode and the convection steam mode.
There are. So convection steam is going to be a combination mode where you can raise the temperature of the oven to 440 degrees, but remember that there will be steam present. You won't be able to see it, but the steam is always present in that mode. When we're using just direct steam, right, we can only go up to 210 degrees, and that's the only way that we're heating the oven. We're not using the additional element to raise that temperature above. We're just using steam. So it's a very, very moisture-rich environment when we're using just straight steam.
Perfect. And I think you might have covered this quickly. If you're steaming veggies in like a plastic container that has holes in the bottom, is that all good to do?
It's not necessary, right? Generally speaking, if you're going to steam vegetables, I would recommend that you lay them directly on the perforated sheet in order to get the greatest amount of circulation of the steam around the vegetables. Now, if you have vegetables that are in a sort of a marinade or some kind of sauce in order to give it a little more flavor, then yes, you can put it into a receptacle on either the perforated tray, or what I would recommend you use is this wire rack, and just put your pan with your vegetables on it and then set it into that nice steamy environment in order to cook it. But you don't necessarily have to put drain holes in it. If you're using the perforated pan, the water will drip through the pan, the excess water will drip through, which is why I like to put that solid pan beneath it, so you're catching that extra water. However, if you're just steaming vegetables or something like that, the water that does amass on the bottom of the oven is easily cleaned up, and it's not hard at all. So again, if you're putting them in a container because you want to keep sauces or seasonings or flavor in contact with your vegetables, I recommend you just put them in a, you can use a Pyrex, you can use metal, you can use ceramic. There's no prohibition on putting different materials in the oven, especially when we're steaming. When we're getting into higher temperature cooking, if we're using convection steam to do a little roasting or something like that, then you want to just kind of avoid plastic altogether. So the only time I would say that you could use plastic would be if you were just doing steaming only and no other of the functions.
All right. Jillian said she used to be able to find the mode where you can say like how dark you want your bread or how crispy. She just can't find it anymore.
She can't find the bread mode. Okay, so what Jillian is referring to when she talks about the exterior finish on her loaf of bread, right? She's referring to one of the features in the oven that we call the more gourmet feature. I know it seems like a crazy name for it. What's more gourmet? It's essentially just more of these gourmet settings. But what the more gourmet setting does, wherever it comes up, right? It can come up in roasting a loaf or baking a loaf of bread. It can come up for baking a pan of potato gratin. It can come up for baking a tray of muffins. What the more gourmet feature is, it's taking full advantage of the sensor in the oven. You're telling it as the chef in your kitchen that I would like the outcome in my oven or in my loaf of bread to be medium brown, dark brown, light brown. So you want to use that more gourmet feature because it's always going to ask you that question. So now how do you access the more gourmet feature? Well, it's going to be in the gourmet settings. So when you choose an item that has a more gourmet choice, in this case, let's look at a potato gratin. When we go to gourmet, select potatoes, and then select potato gratin, we're given two options for how we cook it. One is going to be just cook using convection steam as the mode, and it'll tell you temperature and all of those good things, and you'll just choose that, or you choose the more gourmet setting. When the more gourmet setting is selected, the oven then basically asks you, how do you want it cooked? How would you like it browned? In this case, we have medium brown, so we choose that. You can't set the temperature, and you cannot change the time, and you cannot change the cooking mode. The oven will do all of that for you. When we're baking bread, it's in the gourmet feature. We choose bread, and then when we go into the bread, we select the more gourmet feature in baking bread, and that will give you the alternative of light, medium, and well browned on your bread. So it's going to be under the bread feature in the gourmet button. So let me just go through it logically. Gourmet, bread, or baked goods, bread, more gourmet. And that's where you'll find the selection to make the color of the outside of your bread as you like it. Is that clear enough? I hope.
All right. A great question.
All right.
Can you just talk about, again, how to adjust recipes for
right.
like baseline adjusting?
Sure. So baseline adjusting for any recipe that you're going to use your convection steam oven as an alternative method of preparation from perhaps maybe you used your larger oven or you did it on the stove or something like that. So here's the most important things to remember. If the recipe that you prepared was a baked item or a roasted item, right? Particularly when we are using convection steam as a mode, but the oven is efficient enough that you can lower the temperature in your oven. So examples might be, if I traditionally bake my chocolate chip cookies, right, at 350 degrees, right, in the convection steam oven, I'm more likely going to bake it at between 10 and 25 degrees cooler than I would in a traditional oven. So the first thing you always want to remember is you probably can use a lower baking temperature in order to achieve the same results. The other thing that you always want to remember is that it will probably be done quicker. Obviously, smaller cavity, a little more close quarters in terms of the way the heat is circulated. So things are going to bake a little more efficiently, particularly when we're doing a single tray of something. So really the first two things when you're adjusting for recipes for the convection steam oven, use a lower temperature, particularly when you are involving steam where you hadn't involved steam before. So best example of that is if you roasted your chicken in a 375 degree oven, you can roast your chicken in the convection steam oven using the convection steam mode. You can probably drop that temperature to 360, 355, somewhere in that neighborhood, because you're still going to achieve the same result in about the same amount of time because the steam is going to be more efficient. So those are really the things that you want to look for when you're adjusting a recipe that was coming from a traditional oven and you want to employ steam. When you're using just the straight convection mode in this oven, don't make any time or temperature adjustments. You really won't need to. It's really when you're employing steam or you're allowing the moisture to be trapped in the oven cavity through the convection humid mode that you're going to want to lower that temperature slightly.
All right. Lots of questions about like a cookbook.
A cookbook. So where can you go for resources for your convection steam oven? Well, there aren't a lot, I have to admit, on the market today, but there are a few. I'll give you a shameless plug for the Roth Living YouTube channel and also our Instagram page at Roth Living Lifestyle. There's lots of videos with associated recipes there. And at the Roth Living website, we have a lot of recipes that are posted on our website from all the different chefs in the company. Many of them are geared towards a convection steam oven. So you can certainly check there and see. We're also going to be doing a Thanksgiving event coming up here pretty soon. I'm sure a lot of that will focus on the convection steam oven as well. And then the other website that I found has been fairly helpful, and the recipes are accurate, although not explicitly designed for the Wolf convection steam oven, is a young lady out of Australia. The name of her website is steamandbake.com. And she has some good recipes on there. She does some nice work adjusting recipes for the different models of convection steam ovens that are out there on the market today. So, you know, that she's not going to say you have to use the Wolf or you have to use the Thermador or you have to use one of the European brands. No, she's basically just tried to generalize them so that you can find recipes on there as well. So she has some good stuff on there. Those are really going to be the best sources you can find for recipes for the convection steam oven. It's relatively new, as I said before, on the market, maybe a decade or so. It's been in the residential markets, but so there hasn't been a lot developed for it. But I would definitely advise you to look at both of those sites. I think you'll find a lot of helpful tips there. And not only are there recipes on the Wolf, on the Roth site, but there's also cleaning videos. If you want to watch people cleaning the oven, we have that as well. So do that for you too. Okay. Speaking of cleaning, all right.
Suggestion, maybe like a quick overview about cleaning,
sure.
As well as showing how to remove
the door. Sure. All right. So cleaning is obviously paramount for a lot of folks. That we definitely designed that in, and the thought for designing that into the unit itself. So as I said before, best way to clean it, right? If you've used it to do some roasting where there's going to be some fats, or maybe you've done some potatoes or vegetables and there was olive oils and things like that, might get a little splatter on the oven walls, things like that. You definitely want to run a quick steam cycle. You can take the racks out of the oven should you choose to, or you can leave a rack like this in the oven and still run that steam cycle. Generally about 15 minutes at the highest temperature, just let it run, right? Then let it cool down briefly, just because the surfaces get very hot during that cycle. It's going to be very, very damp inside. There's going to be water pooling on the floor a little bit. There might be some water clinging to the walls and even the ceiling. But what you're going to want to do after you've completed that cleaning cycle is you're going to want to open the door so it's fully extended, fully flat, right? This is very important. Get it flat. Now you'll notice at the back there are two hinges that attach the door to the oven itself. On those hinges, you'll see two small clips that are facing directly back towards the oven. You're going to open those clips so they point directly towards you. They should be pointing straight out, right? Now don't try to take the oven door out when it's in this flattened position. You want to raise it to about a 45-degree angle, and it naturally stops right here. There's a natural stop at this point. Then just grab the oven door firmly. It's not that heavy. It's probably only about 10, 12 pounds. And then just lift it up and out of the oven, right? Just lift it out. Don't extend those two hinges. Just let them stay in that natural position. Now you can easily, even if you're kind of short like me, you can easily reach the back of the oven, right? So if I have any water in here that I need to wipe out, I can easily do that with a clean towel. If I want to wash these side racks, I can just unscrew these thumb screws, just like that. Just take these out and always put these in a safe place. You don't want to lose those. This rack comes out easily. It's stainless steel, can easily run through your dishwasher. So when you need to get this nice and clean, just run it through the dishwasher. Now you can easily clean the side walls, right? So if you've just used the oven for a light cooking task, like you're steaming some vegetables or even steamed maybe a little salmon or some fresh, some potatoes or something like that, all it will require is a quick steam, rinse, and then wipe it down with a clean towel so that you've got all the residual moisture out of the oven. But if you need to go one step further, what I recommend is you get some of this, the barkeeper's friend, right? Take a little bit of this powder, sprinkle it into that residual water that's in the bottom of the oven, and then just make a paste with either a towel or a blue Scotch-Brite sponge or scrubbing pad. Neither of the blue Scotch-Brite will not scratch or damage your stainless steel. So once a week, what I do is I do that exact process, water, a little barkeeper's friend, make a paste, and then I just scrub down my walls very quickly. I wipe them down, and then I like to run the steam cycle again for about 5 minutes just to sort of rinse everything off. And now I know my oven is super clean. This oven is about 2 years old, and you can still see that it's still maintaining a lot of its luster and its shine. You know, you can keep these, are very easy to maintain on the interior. Should you want to go a step further, you can take the back stainless steel panel out by just using the little star driver screws and take those out, and then that can go through the dishwasher as well. But other than that, that's really the easiest way to clean it. There are other chefs who like to use sort of the no fume, easy off oven cleaner. I honestly don't see a need to use that powerful a chemical to clean A, this small a cavity, and B, something that's as easy to clean with just a little bit of elbow grease. And literally, it's a 5 to 10 minute job to completely clean the inside of the oven so that it's really spotless at the end. Now to replace the door, because I've gotten some calls from people who put it back wrong. We want to make sure that you understand how to put it back. Grip it by the sides of the door, and you're going to insert those hinges with the door at that 45-degree angle. Do not try to insert the hinges when it's flat. All right, just do it at that 45-degree angle. Just push it in. It'll naturally catch. Once it does, just extend it downwards. I didn't go all the way in. Extend it downwards and then flip the two clips back over. And now the door is reattached. If for any reason you are somehow managed to extract the door with the hinges in this position and not in the resting position, you're just going to have to push really hard to get the hinge up into that 45-degree angle. So that's why you don't ever want to remove the door when it's in the flattened position. It can only be removed in this position. Okay? Hope that helps. Oh, one more thing about cleaning. The inside of your oven glass, right? Best way, make a little paste again with your barkeeper's friend. Use your towel, clean off whatever might amass or accumulate on the glass. And if once that's done, then just take a little non-ammoniated window cleaner, spray it, wipe it down, microfiber cloth, you'll be good to go. It'll be beautiful and it'll stay nice and clean. Okay?
Perfect.
All right.
A couple questions. When the steam oven's heating up, how can you tell what temperature it's at, and how do you know when it's at full temperature?
Okay, so if we are preheating the oven, right? So if we're talking about how will we know what temperature the oven is as it's heating up, and also when do we know that it's reached full temperature? So let's say we were preheating in just a regular convection mode, because that's going to be the mode that you most frequently preheat the oven in, is that straight convection mode. No steam, right? None at all, just plain dry air. That's going to be the mode that you most frequently use the oven preheated, right? So if we do that, what's going to happen is the convection is the second choice. So we just do that. We just go over, we start heating up, right? So the first thing it's going to say heating up right here on the top, right? That's going to be the first thing it's going to do. It's going to slowly count up. It doesn't give you a counting up, right? It doesn't show anywhere on the dial that it is at 160 degrees, 165 degrees. It doesn't do that. It won't do that. It'll just show the heating up. And then once it reaches the set temperature that you've asked it to do, it will chime, but it will only chime once, and it's very quiet. And even if you try to use the settings and crank the volume up as loud as it possibly goes, you still need to be in the same room in order to hear it. You're never going to hear it from 2 rooms away. It's just not, but it's never going to give you a counting up in terms of how the oven is heating up. The only time it shows an ascending temperature scale is when you are engaging the temperature probe, when you are using the temperature probe to roast a chicken or a prime rib or whatever it might be. The probe will automatically read the initial temperature of whatever it's inserted into, and then as it rises, it will count up. But the oven only says heating up until it reaches that set point temperature. It won't give you a counting up. The nice thing about it is that the preheat time, even to temperatures around 350 degrees, is less than usually 7 or 8 minutes. It's very, very quick, obviously, because it's a very small cavity, so it doesn't take long to preheat the oven cavity. I hope that answers that question.
A couple questions on turkey.
Turkeys, sure.
Best setting to use?
Sure.
And what do you think of maximum sizes?
What do we think of maximum size? So we're talking about turkey, because obviously we're getting to that time of year when we're thinking about maybe roasting a turkey, baking a turkey. So we're going to think about that for now. So question was best way to cook it. What's the best mode for cooking a turkey? And also what's about the maximum size that you could put in here? I have cooked with, I've had actual experience of cooking an 18+ pound bird very, very efficiently. It took actually less than 2 hours to complete the entire process of roasting that turkey from a cold oven all the way to a fully cooked bird. So it was 18 pounds. I believe, and I have no data to support this, you can probably get a 20 pounder in here. I would say that you can probably get a 20 pound, there it's preheated. So you heard the chime, and now it's reached the preheat temperature. So that was probably less than 5 minutes to preheat to 330 degrees Fahrenheit, just as a little aside from the last question. So I think you can get a 20 pound bird in there, particularly if you truss it. The other thing that you would want to remember too is that even though the oven will tell you if I am roasting that turkey to put it in rack position 2, you can put it in rack position 1, which will give you greater room at the top. So you can probably get a slightly bigger bird in there if you roast on rack position 1. That being said, I think the best mode for roasting a turkey in this oven is going to be the convection steam mode. And in fact, I have a recipe for a dry brined turkey that we developed a couple of years ago now for a Thanksgiving event. So I'm more than happy to share that with everybody. It does have instructions not only for roasting in a traditional oven, but also in the convection steam oven. So I am more than happy to share that with anybody who's interested in perhaps preparing their turkey in the convection steam oven this year. Remember, very important, when you're using that convection steam mode to roast your turkey, it's going to be much faster, right? So you don't have that luxury of saying, okay, I've got 3.5 hours before this is going to be done. You're probably looking at somewhere between maybe at the long, even if it's a big 20 pounder, you're probably only looking about 2 hours and 15 minutes, maybe 2.5 hours tops to finish cooking it all the way, even if it's stuffed. So just keep that in mind when you're roasting and you're planning for your Thanksgiving Day meal. You're going to want to give it that chance to cook. And then also remember too, you're going to want to make sure that you're using your temperature probe, right? Make sure that you use your temperature probe. You don't need to really know a time at that point, because the oven is going to be governed off the internal temperature reading on the probe. So as you're cooking your turkey in the oven, just remember the probe's going to govern it. It's going to tell you when it's done. It's not going to shut the oven off, but it is going to tell you when it's done. And then you're going to have to rest it yourself. Unfortunately, there is no programming in the oven for roasting a turkey. They haven't figured out the poultry thing quite yet in terms of doing the standard slow roasting modes. So
what color is that part?
That probe, that one I just showed you was blue, but it's the black probe that's going to be used in your convection steam oven. Always remember, if you have one of our Wolf M or E series ovens and a convection steam oven, those probes are not interchangeable. The black one goes in your convection steam oven. The blue one goes in your larger wall oven. And that's easy to remember because these ovens have a blue interior, so they match the cladding on the probes. Okay.
All right. Give me just a quick second.
That's all right.
To compile some of our reservoir questions.
Okay, great.
Proper fill line for the reservoir, and which direction does the hole go in?
Okay, so on your reservoir, right, the maximum fill is just to slightly below the very top of this reservoir. We'll take the lid off, right? That doesn't really expand the reservoir at all. And the hole in the lid is always going to go towards the front of the reservoir. So in other words, this hole should always be close to the front. It should not be that way, right? Doesn't really fit. You can go just to the front. So that's the best way to insert it, is just like that. So that's how it'll go in, okay? Other reservoir questions?
Yeah, a couple questions. Hard water, they have a like reverse osmosis, like demineralized. Maybe you can talk about a couple different scenarios with hard water, still,
sure.
You know, some of that.
Sure. All right, so let's start off by talking about the settings in your convection steam oven. So we're talking about hard water. We're talking about if you have particular filtration systems in your home and how that might affect the convection steam oven. When your appliance was installed, your installers should have set the water hardness for your particular area, right? For your home, right? There is in the settings button, there is an actual choice to actually set water hardness, right? When your appliance was installed, it came with a kit. That kit allowed whoever installed it to test the hardness of your water and then set it on this scale that's actually in your oven. It doesn't really change as much about how the oven performs when you're cooking in it, but what it really does is determine how frequently you may have to descale the item or the oven as you're going forward, right? So obviously the harder your water in your area, the more frequently you'll need to descale the oven. So by setting the water hardness, it helps determine that, right? But the sensors can also determine when you get some amount of lime scale buildup in the system. But generally speaking, here in Colorado, we're finding that usually descaling is an annual process depending on how often you use the oven, right? That's going to change it. Now, for those of you who have different filtration systems in your home, for those of you who have an reverse osmosis whole home system, in other words, it's not just one little spigot or faucet on your sink, but the entire house. So all the water is filtered through a reverse osmosis process. For you only, you're going to have to add a little bit of any kind of bottled water to the reservoir every time you fill it, right? Very important, because on a reverse osmosis system, all of the minerals in the water are stripped out. They are filtered out. This appliance needs trace amounts of minerals in the water source in order to activate the sensors in the boiler that tell the oven the reservoir is empty. I've been asked to make steam. I can't make steam with no water. So what happens is those minerals activate the sensor that pushes the drawer out of the front of the oven. It alerts you both with a visual message and an audible message. And if you are running a duration cooking process, it will pause that process at the exact moment it ran out of water and continue to pause it until you refill the water, push it back in. So for those of you with that reverse osmosis system, you can still fill the reservoir from your faucet, right, with your reverse osmosis water, but you want to add literally a teaspoon of any other bottled water. It can be, water from the supermarket. It could be fancy mineral water. It can be anything you want. It just has to have some minerals in it. So you just need to add a small amount. That will enable the sensor to function the way it's supposed to, because the last thing you want is the oven thinking there's water, because the sensors can't read the minerality of it, and trying to make steam with no water, because then it could burn out the boiler. It could damage the boiler system in the back of the oven to make the steam. So you want to be sure that if you do have a reverse osmosis whole home system, that you do add a little bit of water from another source to your reservoir. For every other type of filtration system, it's not a problem unless it's an RO system. And it's not going to benefit you by adding deionized or distilled water or anything like that to this. It's not going to improve the performance of the oven. And I have to say this, I mean, partially it's in jest, but also it's also true. I did have a gentleman say to me, well, could I improve the flavor of my food if I put white wine and soy sauce in my reservoir and just make steam out of that? It probably would improve the flavor, but it would also probably ruin the system, because there's sugars and all sorts of acids and things like that, and they're not really good for the system. So don't put anything here but water, or when you need to descale it, the descaling solution. And that's it.
All right. I have a couple kind of sanitized questions.
Sanitize from the point of view of using the sanitize function?
Yes. Where is it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing sanitizing jars, does it matter if they're like upside down or right side up?
Really does. So great question. So the question is about the sanitizing feature. Sanitizing feature sounds very sort of hospital-like. Sanitize is the word they use for anytime we're going to do a process where we need to make sure that we have a sterile environment, a sterilized bottle or something like that. So the sanitize feature is in the more button, right? And that more button, again, is my favorite button. So under the more button, you will find lots of different interesting things in more button. I always joke that, we have these buttons on the side of the panel, and they would have put a lot more of them, except there was just too many choices. So they had to just write more. So when you're looking for something a lot of times and you don't remember where it is, my guess is it could be in the more button. And that's where you're going to find the sanitize button. So if you scroll over in that more button over to where it says literally sanitize, and it has I don't know why it has a little picture of an 8. It's almost like a hospital sort of setting, but you go there, you go to sanitize, and in sanitizing, you have 3 choices: the sterilization of a baby bottle, or the preparation of a jam jar, right? And then lastly, to preserve jam. Now, it says jam in both of those, but that doesn't mean you can't do pickles or canning vegetables, or you're making your own, mustards or things like that, and you want to preserve them. You can use both of those. It doesn't have to be jams and jellies, right? So the prepared jam jars is essentially a steam cycle, lasts about 12 to 15 minutes. Doesn't matter how you place the jars in the oven, but what I do is always place them facing up, because the steam comes down from the top. There won't be enough steam in that cycle to pool in the bottom of your jars, but it will sterilize and get them prepared nicely for doing your preservation. What I like to do is I put my jars in while I'm preparing whatever I'm going to can. I let them steam, and then I leave them in the oven, right? So that it stays nice and warm in there until I'm ready to fill them. Then once they're filled, when they're ready to be filled, I take them out, fill them, wipe the rims, finger tight, screw on the lids with the ring, place them back into the oven on the same perforated tray, and then use my preserve jam button, which is a very heavy dose of steam, for about a half an hour, sometimes a little bit longer, and just let it do its own preserving, getting those jars nice and hot, getting the seals really nice and tight. Then I remove them from the oven, and I just take a clean towel on my counter and place the jars and let them cool down naturally on that towel on the counter. And I usually leave them overnight before I come back and finish tightening the rings. So I keep them face up when I sterilize them. And then obviously you can put as many as you want on that tray. I've been able to fit 24 of the little 4-ounce jars. And I think with the pint jars, you can get almost 18 or so on the tray. So hopefully that answers the question. Yes.
So Joe and Hilda are asking, what about crispy bacon?
What about crispy bacon? Now, we get this question a lot. So the question is, can you make your bacon crispy in the oven? You can. You absolutely can. Here's how I would recommend it. You do it. Take your solid baking sheet, your solid baking tray. Put a rack on it, right? So that you can allow most of the fat to drip away through the rack. Then I use either convection or convection steam. Steam doesn't really help you with this as much, but the convection will. The nice thing about the convection system in this oven is that you can set the temperature quite low. So instead of, if you set it super high, right, then you get a lot of splatter in the inside of your oven from the bacon. So what I do is I set it in a slightly lower temperature. And when I say lower temperature, I'm talking somewhere between 275 and 325 degrees using convection, and then just cook it until it will get nice and crispy. How long is it going to take? Really depends on how much bacon you have on the tray. But generally speaking, I'm finding it's taking between, like, I don't know, 16 and 20 minutes to get it to that point. It also depends on how crispy you'd like it. But as that fat drains away and you've got that circulating dry air around it, it will get the bacon nice and crispy. So just want to give it that time, but it takes a little bit of time. Again, if you use a higher temperature, it'll cook a little faster, but you got to babysit a little bit closer too. So, more questions?
Yes. Question about like residual water in the bottom being brown. And there was another question about when you're reheating, like the cooling of water. So some of that.
Okay. So one of the questions was about why is there some residual water? Why does it have a slight discoloration on the floor of the oven? Okay. So let's just talk a little bit about the construction of the oven a little bit. Like many of our convection ovens systems, there is a heating element below the floor of the oven. There is also a heating element around the convection fan in the back. The steam is injected through a hole in the roof of the oven, right? Because this is where all that componentry is behind this panel. So the boiler is back here. So the water is boiled there. The steam is injected from the top of the oven. You've got a heat source below the oven and a small heat source in the back of the oven. The reason that the oven gets a little discolored water on the floor is if you've cooked something with using steam, the excess water has pooled on the bottom, but there may have been a certain amount of grease or fats that have also browned during the cooking process. Those may have collected in the water as well. Then what happens is the water, because it's sitting on top of that element that's in the bottom of the oven, that water can evaporate, leaving the residue of the discoloration on the bottom of the floor. That's when you want to use the barkeeper's friend. Again, just that little bit of paste will clean that residue right away off the bottom of your oven. You'll also notice occasionally if you're roasting a lot of meats or fatty meats or things like that, that sometimes you'll get a discoloration around the fan covering, and that's just because the air is helping draw the fats and the particulate matter in the air up against that fan, and so that's why it discolors there in particular. So you can just, again, clean that floor by just using the barkeeper's friend. It'll come right off. I've never had it last more than just a quick rubbing down to get it out of there. And then the other question was about when reheating. So the pooling of the water, again, when you're using the either the standard reheat mode in the quick start menu, or you're using the auto reheat moist function, there will be additional steam pumped into the oven cavity in order to refresh that food. So that's when you get that slight pooling of water on the plate or bowl that you're reheating in. You don't want to cover your food with plastic. That's not good. That's really going to defeat the purpose of the steam, because it's not going to help refresh the food if it's covered in plastic. So in order to keep that water from pooling on your plate or in your bowl, is you definitely want to take the solid tray, that very solid, and then put it here in rack position number 4, right at the very top. That's going to catch that excess water that's being injected from the steam emitter in the top, and then your food is going to reheat. Still be at trace amounts of water just because it's a very, very humid environment in there when we're doing reheat, but that's going to keep the water from pooling on your plates and your bowls. So yeah, just stick that solid tray in rack position 4, and then you can still reheat in rack positions 1 and 3 using your 2 wire racks as your planes for holding the food. Okay.
All right. Some of these are a little bit more specific. I'm trying to kind of get some. Quick question, maybe, can you poach chicken in a steam oven?
Absolutely. You can absolutely poach your chicken in the steam oven. In fact, if you go to the gourmet setting and you scroll over to the poultry square, which is the 3rd square over in your gourmet setting, if you look at the chicken breasts, you have 2 choices for cooking your chicken breasts. The first choice is the steaming method, and that's essentially like poaching, right? Now, in this case, if we're using that choice to do that poaching, it is poaching at 210 degrees, right? So it's a pretty hot oven. If you feel like that's too hot and you would like to poach it at a more gentle temperature, then what I recommend that you do is lower the temperature about 5 to 10 degrees, down between 200 and 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and let your chicken cook. You can just leave them on a tray. You can put them in a 9x13 pan or a small vessel in order to poach them in that. You could add a little wine to that or other ingredients to give it a little more flavor. But when you're steaming in this oven with your chicken, it's going to get very, very, very moist. You're going to get a really similar to a poached chicken breast. So again, you're just using straight steam between 200 and 210 degrees, and it's going to take anywhere from 15 to 20, 22 minutes, depending on how hot you have the oven and how many chicken breasts you have in a container.
Perfect. Kind of leading into that, when doing sous vide, do you need it to vacuum seal the food?
You don't. The question is about sous vide and using your oven as a sous vide cooker. For those of you who aren't familiar with sous vide is when we cook things in a vacuum sealed bag, traditionally in a water bath that regulates the temperature very, very precisely, so that the food that we are cooking in the water bath never exceeds the temperature of the water, right? That's kind of the physical properties of it. You can never get the food to exceed the medium at which it's being cooked. So when we are cooking sous vide in our convection steam oven, we're only going to use steam as the setting. We're generally going to use temperatures between about 120, depending on what you're cooking, and 185 degrees. That's going to be about the range that you're going to use. You're not going to cook anything really, really hot. You're not going to cook a chicken breast at 210 degrees. That's really defeating the purpose. So you want to use the steam setting in that temperature range. Do you need a vacuum seal bag? No. It's certainly preferable, but it's not an absolute necessity. If you don't have a vacuum sealer, the best way to create as close to an airless environment as possible is to put the food that you would like to cook sous vide into a heavy Ziploc bag, right? Add any of your flavoring agents, your aromatics, your seasonings, whatever you'd like. Take that bag and lower it very carefully into a basin or a bowl of water. As the bag is descended into the water, the air is forced up and out through the top of the bag. Once you've forced as much of the air out of the bag as possible, slide the seal and seal the bag, and that's going to replicate as close as possible a sous vide environment for cooking in the convection steam oven. Then just take that bag with the food inside of it, place it onto either your wire rack or your perforated tray, and allow it to cook for the designated period of time, depending on what it is you're cooking. So it can be, you can sous vide some steak, some chops. It can be different cuts of poultry. Breasts are usually the most commonly done, but you can also sous vide shrimp. You can sous vide lobster. You can sous vide eggs. You can sous vide all of these things, always knowing that the temperature of what you're cooking will never exceed the temperature of the oven. So if you like your steak medium rare, you set the oven to 134 degrees Fahrenheit. In the steam mode, you allow your steak to cook for whatever length of time you would choose, knowing that the middle of the steak will never exceed that 134 degrees. So then once it's cooked, you can remove it from the bag, sear it on the barbecue or on your griddle or in a hot cast iron skillet, and voila, you have a reverse seared steak within a perfect medium rare on the inside.
Thank you. A couple questions about strip steak and some meat questions.
Sure.
How would you recommend doing a New York strip steak? And best way to cook like an entire beef tenderloin that's like about 1.5 inches thick.
All right, so we're talking about cooking beef in the convection steam oven. If we're talking about just a single steak, right? If we're talking about single steaks for sort of roasting them and getting them, a really nice internal temperature. If we're talking about single steaks, my recommendation would be this. I would, in this case, right? Because this oven cannot sear, it cannot broil, right? We don't have the ability to create a lot of heat down from the top, so we can't make a broiler effect in order to get that exterior color on the outside. So best way to do that, preheat the oven with the solid tray inserted in the oven in the convection steam mode to about somewhere between, 385 degrees, maybe 425 degrees, somewhere in that range. Hot. Get the oven hot. Get the pan hot. All right. You want that pan to be really, really preheated. Then with your seasoned steak, once the oven has reached temperature, you're going to place those steaks onto the already hot tray, right? And allow it to sear and roast. You could use your probe. If the steak is large enough, you could insert the probe into one of the steaks, and then you know that your probe attachment is here on the right-hand wall. You would plug that in. Just be careful. It's going to be very hot. So you want to plug that in. That'll help you cook to that internal temperature that you desire. If you remember, your probe settings are always is one box to the left of the oven temperature setting. So once you choose that, you can now set your internal temperature that you want to cook to using the probe setting right here. So again, set it to whatever you'd like. And then once the probe is inserted, just roast it to that internal temperature that you like. But just make sure that, especially if you're just roasting a small steak, and when I say small, it can be, it can be a big steak, but we're not talking about a roast or anything like that. You just want to make sure that probe is inserted as far in there as possible, so there's no metal exposed on the probe in the oven, because you could run the risk of reading the oven temperature versus the temperature of the steak. So, but then set that probe temperature, run it so that you get the desired internal temperature that you would like. Going to be really important. And so for your roast, again, if you're going to do a tenderloin roast, is kind of what I think Lynn was referring to or was asking about, doing a tenderloin. There's only one way to do that, really, in the oven, in my opinion, for the best results and the most predictable results, which is the slow roast mode. And that's, again, in the more button, right down here on the bottom row, the more button. If you scroll over to where it says slow roast, right, that's where you can choose what cut you would like to cook, right? All of that is in the, so if we go to a tenderloin and we choose the tenderloin, the first thing it's going to ask you is, how do you want it cooked? Rare, medium. Remember that these are modifiable, right? So if I select medium, right, the oven determines that medium for this oven is 144 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature. If you are comfortable with that temperature, then you don't need to change it. The other thing and then what you're going to do is you're going to decide how long your item is going to roast. Now, the minimum amount of time is 2 hours and 30 minutes. Remember, slow roast, right? We're not talking about super fast. We're talking about the slow roast mode. So the minimum amount of time is 2.5 hours. The maximum amount of time is 4.5 hours. I'm going to tell you just from experience of using this oven now for the last 2 years, the longer you can let something roast in slow roast mode, well, can't say that 3 times fast, the better the quality the product will be. If you rush it and try to get it done in 2.5 hours, and you're probably saying to yourself, 2.5 hours is not rushing it, right? But if you can cook it longer, you're going to get a better product. So as long as you have 3, or in this case, 3.5 hours between right now and when I want to serve it, I can do that, right? I can cook it in those 3.5 hours. It's going to come out of the oven at exactly 3.5 hours from right now, and it will be completely rested, ready to slice, ready to serve, no waiting. Everything else can be prepared to match this preparation. It will be done exactly when you've asked it to be done. So in my opinion, this is the best way to slow roast or roast a tenderloin, a prime rib, a leg of lamb, crown roast of pork, a veal shoulder, you name it. There's lots of different ways in here to cook them. I mean, all sorts of different cuts that are already in here. And should you want to, you can make your own up. So not too long ago, I did basically a New York strip of bison in the convection steam oven using the slow roast mode. So if you know approximately what the internal temperature needs to be for the way you like to cook it, you can then program it for that, and you don't need to choose one of their presets. You can choose your own. But that's going to be the best way to roast any large cut of meat, is using that slow roast mode. The only downside is there's no ability to sear. So my recommendation is that prior to putting your roast into the oven, sear it on your barbecue, on your griddle, in a large hot skillet, or even under a broiler. Just give it the seasoning, run it under a broiler in your M series just to give it that little exterior color and flavor, and then slow roast it. Just doing that little bit of pre-searing, that's not going to affect the internal temperature at all. That's all going to happen in here. So that would be my recommendation for doing any cut like that, where you want to control that internal temperature precisely and have it done exactly when you want it to be.
All right. Maybe you can just touch on, like, when in convection mode, you still use it like a convection oven. There's not necessarily anything crazy just because it's the convection steam.
Right, right. So the question is about the convection mode, and is there anything different about convection in this oven that we might say about this oven? All right, so convection mode is all dry air. There is obviously no steam being produced whatsoever, and the oven is being ventilated so that we're not trapping any moisture or any heat in the oven cavity the way we would in a convection humid mode. Convection, heat produced from underneath the floor and at the back of the oven, all driven by the fan. So it is a very traditional style of convection. The difference obviously between this oven and the larger ovens is that there is only one convection fan, so that the air is not going to be as random in terms of how it's moving through the cavity. So I would not recommend that you try to bake 3 trays of something in here and expect exactly similar results on all 3 trays, because the convection system in this oven is not as sophisticated as in our traditional wall ovens. So use convection when you don't think steam is going to benefit you, when you want to dry something out, right? Steam is not going to benefit making shortbread cookies. Steam really doesn't benefit when you are baking a biscuit. Steam is not going to really benefit you from, when you're making muffins. None of those things are really going to benefit from steam being produced. The other things are things that you want to sort of dry and make them roasted. So you can use convection, right, to do some dry roasting of things, right? If you're just putting something in where you don't need to create you don't want any extra moisture, you're just trying to keep something nice and dry, really, that's going to be what you're going to use convection for. Again, maximum I would recommend would be 2 trays in the oven at one time with the convection mode. Just like on convection steam, just like on convection humid, we're really limiting ourselves to 2 planes of cooking or baking, as opposed to multiple, like 3 or 4. The only time you're going to use 3 or 4 trays simultaneously is going to be when you're in the steam mode. Then you can use up to 4 trays at the same time.
Right, a couple more easy peasies. Metal pan warming.
Yes. So this is not uncommon. Sorry, this pan is a little dirty, but so what happens sometimes during a baking or steaming, but mostly baking or roasting process, is that the pan will heat up in the oven while it's in the glides and while it's in the rack slides. Occasionally, when you go to remove the pan at the end of the cycle, it will warp, it will twist a little bit in the rack, right? Generally speaking, it won't twist so much that without just a little extra tug, it can be removed, right? It's easily removed, and that warping doesn't last very long when it does that. So you just have to give it a second, just slide it out as much as you can, and then give a little extra tug, and it should de-warp and come right out. The way to avoid warping, if you possibly can, is to spread as much food as possible onto the tray. So in other words, the tray is more likely to warp if there's one thing right in the middle of the tray versus something spread out over the entire surface. So if you can possibly avoid it, don't put a single small item in the middle of the tray, because I'm almost guaranteeing you it will warp if you do that. And it also will warp at much more frequently at higher temperatures. So when you're talking about temperatures in excess of 350 and up to 440 degrees in whatever cooking mode you're in, it is more likely to warp. So higher temperatures and smaller foodstuffs on the tray itself is more likely to cause warping. So again, you shouldn't ever have that problem where you can't get the tray out at all. It can obviously be problematic if it's something heavy, but usually if it's something heavy, the tray won't warp. So I think you should be good with that. Hope that answers that question.
So we have a bunch of bread questions, as you can imagine. I'm going to try and...
Okay.
Sorry, I
it's okay.
One question really quickly, I'm kind of gathering my breads.
Uh-huh.
Can you make a gravy out of a roast, like from the convection steam oven? Like, I'll be taking it out, but you could make gravy from roast in the flat pan.
Absolutely. So if the question is about making gravy from the drippings from a roast, what I recommend is that obviously you're either using your metal sheet, your solid sheet for doing your roast, or you're doing a roast in a slightly smaller sized roasting pan, a metal roasting pan that you can put onto your wire rack. That works really nicely, and then you will be able to collect all those drippings. But yeah, one of the accessories that Wolf sells for the convection steam oven is an enameled pan. It's a porcelain enameled solid baking tray for the convection steam oven. I use that extensively when roasting the chicken or prime ribs or tenderloins or things like that, because I always get better caramelization on the bottom of that pan than I do on the stainless steel pans. So if that's something might interest you, you can always pick up an accessory pan of the porcelain enamel pan for your convection steam oven. I find that for roasts, that gives you the best amount of browning and caramelization. I also think it cleans up better and it looks nicer. So just a nice thing to have. But yes, you can definitely use the drippings from your roast to make your sauces and gravies.
All right, a couple of bread questions.
Okay, let's go with the bread questions.
Okay. When you're making bread, do you only proof in the convection steam oven, or do you need to proof outside? And then put it in the convection steam oven?
I understand what they're saying, right? So talking about proving your bread in the convection steam oven. You have that option in your convection steam oven. And of course, you can probably guess where it is in that more button. If you look at the auto steam bake feature, right? If you touch auto steam bake in your convection steam oven under the more button and scroll to the very last choice, you have the proof button, right? So you touch the proof button and now you've got the automatic temperature is set at 90 degrees. But if you'd like it a little warmer than that, you can take it up from that. And that's obviously using a little bit of steam to create a moist environment. Now, do you need to prove in your convection steam oven in order to bake most efficiently? No. The nice thing about it is if you're proving the dough that you've already shaped on the baking tray, you could literally let it finish proofing and then automatically swing into a bread baking mode, right? And the oven will, because almost every time you bake bread in this oven, you're starting from a cold oven, right? So if we've just had it at 90 degrees to proof the bread, all we have to do now is switch over to the baking mode. And whether it's in auto steam bake or in the more gourmet feature, or we're just using convection steam to bake the bread, we can easily do that. So you can prove and bake all in one fell swoop by allowing the bread to rise for its final rise in the oven for that last proof before you start baking it. Does that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another bread question.
Yes.
That's mode for like muffins, like you want to keep them moist, but not too brown on top.
Okay. So couple of choices for muffins, right? So if you're going to bake your own muffins, if you have a recipe from your favorite blueberry oatmeal muffins, right? You've made them for years and you've baked them in your traditional oven. Maybe it was 325 degrees and it was 18 minutes. I'm just throwing those numbers out there, right? So you can come back and replicate that in your convection steam oven. But what I would recommend that you do, because remember, muffins are batters, right? So it's a battered item. Use your convection humid mode for that, right? Because you're not adding steam, but you're not releasing moisture from the oven cavity. Again, if it was 325 for 18 minutes, you can probably replicate that same temperature, 325. You could even go a little bit lower, right? Maybe you want to go 315, little bit less, right? And then if it was 18 minutes in your traditional oven, set your timer for 15 minutes and just check them a little bit early. Again, especially if you're using a lower temperature, you want to make sure that you're going to get them nice and tender and soft on top. So using that convection humid traps that moisture in, but doesn't add steam. So it's not going to make your muffins not develop a crust, but it's going to be a soft crust. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, of course, is if you go to your gourmet setting, right? And in the gourmet setting and you scroll to baked goods. Nope, I'm wrong. Wait, hold up. It's, of course, it's in the more button and it's under more gourmet. And if you scroll under more gourmet, there is actually a button for muffins, right? So, and in more gourmet again, it's going to ask you one question. Would you like them medium brown? As long as that temperature of that color seems acceptable to you, the oven will do the rest of the work. So what I would recommend that you do, if you have a recipe that you really like and that you baked before and you know how it works in your regular oven, try the more gourmet feature. Bake a batch and just see how they come out and see if that's acceptable to you. If it's not, then I would suggest that you play with that convection humid setting, right? Using the temperature and approximate time that you were doing in your other oven. But that convection humid mode is going to give you really nice results when we're talking about soft, textured baked goods like a muffin. All right.
Okay. Save this.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's when my group is showing up too.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
They'll just have to deal with it.
Quickly, do you need a microwave if you're doing a convection steam oven?
Boy, that's a great question. And really, what the question is, do you need a microwave if you own a convection steam oven? All right, I'm gonna say something. I'm not trying to be judgmental in any way, shape, or form. A convection steam oven is an appliance for people who love to cook. This is a culinary appliance. A microwave, quite frankly, is an appliance of convenience. It makes your life a little bit easier, makes things a little bit faster, but you're not gonna make a beef Wellington in a microwave. It's very unlikely that you are. Like I said before, the only thing this can't do that a microwave can, really technically, is pop popcorn and reheat your coffee. And it could reheat your coffee, but you wouldn't want to do that because the mug would be scalding and the coffee might be a little diluted. So those are really the only two things. Can I melt butter in here? Absolutely. I can just set it on convection 95 degrees and put a tray of butter in there and just melt it. Will it be as fast as a microwave? No, but I could melt it in here, right? Could I melt chocolate in here? probably not a good idea, especially if there's any kind of moisture in here. It might not be good for your chocolate. But if you have a range of any Wolf range, you have the melt burners on your range, just throw the chocolate in a pot and set it over the lowest flame on either your induction melt burner or your gas melt burner, and it'll melt your chocolate perfectly and hold it indefinitely until you're ready to do it. So what I would recommend, that if you really do need a microwave, but you don't want to dedicate wall space to a microwave or an under counter space to a microwave, buy an inexpensive microwave and hide it in your pantry. Put it back somewhere where you know when you need it to reheat your coffee, or if you need that microwave popcorn fix, Lord knows why, but you certainly could. Then you have a microwave available to you. But really, this appliance is designed for folks who just want to experiment with different food preparations. Obviously, you can steam, you can refresh, you can obviously roast, bake, all the different things in here that you couldn't really do in a microwave or don't want to do in a microwave. And obviously, as I said before, you can use this as a defrosting tool. So if you were defrosting in your microwave before, this is going to do a 50,000 times better job defrosting than a microwave will ever do, because it'll never cook the food the way a microwave does. So I hope that answers that without being too snobby about it.
So Missy has just kind of put that steak in the probe. I'm just going to verbatim
say
the question.
I'm listening.
Confused about if you can probe after you've heated the oven up for an individual steak and then put it on a preheated pan, but then can you probe it to a preset temp?
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Can you set the probe temp after you've preheated?
You can. So the question is, if I'm going to do my steak onto a preheated pan and use my probe, can I set the probe temperature after the steak is set on the hot pan to cook? The answer to that question is yes. So if the probe is, if I have the pan in there and it's nice and hot, I have my steak, I'll take my probe, I'll put it inside the steak, I'll open the oven door, I'll lay the steak on the tray, I'll be very careful to open this little door and insert the probe. If I haven't set my goal temperature for my probe up here before that, not a problem. I can go back to that screen where I can set the probe temperature right here. My steak is roasting. My oven is 415 degrees. My steak is roasting. Now I just come back and I highlight that and I touch it and I go to the probe temperature that I desire, because it's not going to cook that fast, right? It's not going to take 30 seconds to cook my steak. So now my steak is at 135. I just touch enter and now it's programmed right into there. So as long as the probe is inserted and I've set that temperature, the oven will then chime when it reaches that goal temperature every time.
I'm going to give you two.
What
temp did you steam the shrimp at?
Yep.
And do you have a good sweet potato fry recipe? You want them crispy.
You want them crispy. All right. So the shrimp, right? And this is a great way to think about steaming seafood. Remember that I said that very explicitly. Steaming seafood. All seafood except tuna. But there has to be an exception. So any seafood that you want to steam, whether it's a fish fillet, it's scallops, it's shrimp, it's mussels and clams, it's any of those seafoods, you want to steam them at a temperature not exceeding 205 degrees, but not less than 175 degrees. The shrimp I did at 200 degrees, right? I've just found that 200 degrees for 8 minutes gives me a really, really great product with my shrimp. So that's the temperature I chose for the shrimp, 200 degrees. Why we use a temperature that's slightly lower is because it comes closer to replicating a gentle poaching technique, so I don't run the risk of elasticizing and drying out my seafood. Remember, seafood has almost zero fat, right? Shrimp, no fat. Lobster, no fat. Scallops, no fat. The fats are very different, so that if I overcook it, if I oversteam it, I get this rubbery, chewy, bouncy thing in my mouth, which I don't really want, right? So that's why we use a slightly lower temperature, because it makes a more gentle environment, so my fish comes out much more tender, much more succulent, so that I'm going to be much happier. So again, with all your seafood preparations, I generally recommend, if you're going to steam them, 175 to 205 degrees max for your cooking your seafood.
Perfect. Sweet potato recipe?
Sweet potato fries. So if we're talking about fresh sweet potato fries, right? If we're talking about fresh potatoes, right? Always tricky to do that. You have two choices. I think the convection steam will work the best. Just make sure that, and when you're using the convection steam and you're going to roast your potatoes, again, high temperatures. You've got to be 400 degrees and upwards, right? No colder. So 400, 410, 425. I don't think you need to go to 440, but I think you can get into that range, you know, somewhere between 400 and 430 degrees, somewhere in that ballpark. To get them nicely crispy, obviously you want to make sure that they're, you know, they're cut, they're seasoned. You want a little bit of oil on the outside of them because they will, because of the nature of a sweet potato, they like to stick to the stainless. The other thing I would recommend that you do is preheat the pan in the oven. So convection steam mode between 400 and 430 degrees for your sweet potato. And then you can roast them very, very effectively. But I would say jumpstart them by putting them onto a hot pan. They're going to take probably anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes. You may have to turn them one time during the process, but not necessarily every time. So it'll depend. But that would be my best recommendation for sweet potatoes. If you're going to do frozen sweet potatoes, right? If you buy a bag of frozen pre-cooked sweet potatoes, pre-cut sweet potatoes, just go to Quick Start, more gourmet, and then just scroll over to the frozen potato app and roast your sweet potatoes in the frozen potato app or the setting, and just use those package directions to cook them there. But you won't need to worry about temperature, just worry about time.
And frozen pizza, since we're talking about frozen things.
Frozen pizza has its own settings. So just like with the frozen appetizers and the frozen potatoes, the frozen pizza setting is exactly the same. You have your frozen pizza box, you look at the back, disregard every piece of information on that box except the time. Then take your pizza and place it either on the rack like this or on either one of the trays. I like the rack myself, but you can put it on either one of the baking trays as well, and then place it into the cold oven, and then just start the cycle on the frozen pizza corresponding to the amount of time the box asked you to cook it to. Now, I have had some experience with cooking some frozen pizzas in here. The only thing this oven cannot do when it comes to frozen pizzas is this whole things where they're like self-rising crust and this and that. It doesn't know that, and you can't teach it that. So it's basically just knowing that you have a frozen pizza dough with tomato sauce and some sort of toppings on it. So it's going to cook it that way. Will it always make it better than you could in your other oven or something like that? Not necessarily. They're here. But it is something that it will do a really nice job baking the pizza. So just be, you know, really cognizant that it'll do a nice job, but it can't accommodate all the different things that they've got now with frozen pizzas. But it does a really, really good job. And it'll usually do it faster than the box says it's going to take. So in other words, if the box says 35 minutes, it might take 32. It might take 31. It really depends because it's going to censor that and it's going to read it before it starts to bake it. So that's just basically, so the frozen pizza, just treat it like that. It's really easy.
All right, I think we're going to have to wrap it.
Okay.
You can plug Thanksgiving one more time.
Sure.
I'll answer some of these via email.
Okay.
I have all the questions, and so we'll answer tomorrow over the next couple days.
Right. So
any specific questions we didn't get.
Right. So if we didn't get to your question this evening, we apologize, but we will answer them via email or over the next 24 to 36 hours. We'll get those questions answered. Just because we have another event that's pressing here in just a few minutes, but we want to make sure that you know that you will get your questions answered either by myself or by Lynn or somebody else here on the staff. Also, remember too that on the 19th of this month, we are going to have a Thanksgiving Day question and answer session, not solely dedicated to the convection steam oven, but to any and all of your Wolf cooking appliances. So you can certainly sign up for that and tune into that. It's going to be between 2 and 4 p.m. There won't be any sort of demonstration with that, but what there will be is just all your questions and answers about best ways to cook a turkey or bake a pie or maybe make your famous sweet potato casserole, whatever it might be. We're here to answer those questions as you get ready for the big Thanksgiving Day holiday coming up here in the next few weeks. So definitely, you know, if you're interested, tune into that. It'll be again 2 to 4 p.m. Mountain Time on the 19th, which is a Thursday. It's actually 1 week before Thanksgiving. So you can definitely check that out if you're interested. And again, if you do need more content for your convection steam oven, I do recommend that you check out the Roth Living YouTube channel or the Roth Living Lifestyle Instagram page. Those are both linked together so you can go from one to the other. And then also, again, that steamandbake.com has some really good recipes, albeit they have a sort of European, sort of continental flair to them, but I think you'll find that there's some interesting things on there as well. So I can't thank everybody enough for bearing with me and joining with us today. We have really enjoyed bringing this to you, and hopefully, should you have any more questions that you need to email me directly with your steam oven questions, I'm always happy to respond when I get